You are about to journey against the current of contemporary thought and beyond the troubled waters of daily news to the very source of our extraordinary culture. You are going upstream with Cashel and Edge.
Well, here we are, Loy. We're just talking off the air where I asked you, since I have sort of recurring hay fever, a very mild case, but I wanted you to give me a snot alert if you saw a snot running down.
Yeah. I'll give you the high sign.
I mean, even if it's on air, I know it's going to be a little embarrassing, but it's better than to sit there, you know.
You want me to say there's snot coming out of your nose?
Or just raise your hand.
Okay.
Make a snot gesture.
Okay. All right.
When you're off camera. That way I can just...
Hey, Jack. Yeah, by the way, welcome to Upstream with Cashel and Edge.
Yes, indeed.
You recognize this?
I do indeed. And is it square with the camera there so they could see that?
It's still hot. It's warm.
It is literally right off the press.
It is right. It's not like in school when it smelled great like those mimeographs, but it's pretty nice.
In fact, I sat around this morning waiting, okay, UPS, show up so I can have a book to show on the air, and they came through, so there we are.
The book is Untenable by Jack Cashel.
Yes, it is.
This is a beautiful cover.
Isn't that a nice cover, I must say?
This is going to sell books.
Right. Credit goes to my cover designer, Joel Gilbert, who was instrumental in putting that together.
Yeah, he did a great job, and whoever took the photo did a good job, too. I'm sure they're deceased.
I suspect they are. You know,
this is a picture of a young Jack Cashel.
Yeah, can you hold that up so people can choose which one is
which camera? Where am I?
I don't know. Where's the camera?
Anyway, that I'm sure that they used one of those old flash bars to get that shot.
It was just some amateur. I mean, like, that wasn't. It was just a sort of an incidental photo in which the composition turned out perfectly.
It's great. The true story of white ethnic flight from America's cities.
Untenable.
Which we've talked about a little bit here, Jack.
Yeah.
But Newark happened to be ground zero for you, and that was a really, really strong example of the changes that were going on in that period.
Right. It became the poster child for urban dysfunction. And yet, you know, as I say early in the book, I quote Dostoevsky, who said, if you tell the story of your village and you tell it well, you'll have told the story of the world. And my village wasn't even Newark. It rhymes with pork, by the way, for future reference.
You don't say Newark.
No, you don't say Newark. Maybe if you're in Delaware or something.
You say Newark.
Newark, like cork, pork, dork, you know.
I like that.
That's very simple.
I knew a guy who was a dork.
Yeah, right. Once there was a guy from Newark. I knew he was a dork, blah, blah, blah. But no, my village wasn't even Newark. It was my neighborhood in Newark, which is called Roseville. It's utterly unassuming, unmemorable neighborhood for most people, except for the people who live there. And for the people who live there, it was, when I was gathering, reminiscences from people who grew up with me or, before or after me, the word idyllic kept coming up, which is not a word you would associate with Newark.
No.
And Roseville was just an unassuming part of Newark. It wasn't like the lace curtain part of Newark or the high-end Italian part of Newark.
It could be that the reason they refer to it as idyllic is that their lives have not gone well since then.
No, actually,
I'm just going to throw that in there. That's
a possibility. But I will actually, what happened is actually the opposite of that, in a way.
Uh-huh.
Because every 72, what the census does is they wait 72 years to release a given year census, right? I don't know why. It's like
that's
JFK.
A lifetime, so they're waiting for people to cycle through this little time on Earth.
That's right.
What the hell possible reason could there be for that? And why would anybody approve that?
Well, it's not like JFK's brain.
Sounds good. 72 years. I'll be out of here. I know that.
It's not like JFK's brain or something, where some national secret would be involved. They wait just long enough so that it won't be relevant to anyone who lived at that time and place, But my block in 1950, I didn't live there yet. We moved there in 1953 when I was 5. So fortunately for me, the census came out in 2022, so I could see what my block looked like in 1950.
Mm-hmm.
And this is what I mean by unassuming. There were 83 households on the block. And at that time, these census takers would designate the head of household, right?
Mm.
And they would use that word head.
Mm-hmm.
Of the 83 households, do you want to guess how many had a male head in the household?
80?
81. I mean, if you went to that block in Newark today, there's probably
People still died back then, but that's the only
right.
reason
There were a couple
why
widows
they weren't there.
Were 5 years after World War II. That happened.
Yeah.
If you went back to an urban block today, not just in Newark or any place, Kansas City, you'd be lucky to find a male-headed household with a married male father in the
Especially
house.
if they knew you were coming.
Yeah, right. They'd have packed up and gone, you know. So they were, and then I looked what they listed as your occupation, right? And of the 81 male heads, 79 had jobs, 2 were unemployed. And of those 79, I'd say 79 were either blue collar or low level white collar, you know, like clerk or something like that. And there was some repetition, but there were some things you would rarely ever see in a neighborhood today in Kansas City, like a casket maker, you know, that was my favorite one, or a rubber molder, you know. And I don't think there was a college graduate on the block.
Wow. All of those tasks have long ago been relegated to Asian destinations.
Or AI, you know. It's,
yeah.
But I don't know who makes caskets now.
Well, everything's made in
China.
Factory in China, slapped together with laminate. I don't know. I haven't even thought about that. I'm sure maybe there's an opportunity there for us.
Could be. Although my favorite occupation, and this was of the 79 working males, 30 of them had a working female in the house, or a wife. Okay. And in every case, not a significant other, but a wife. You know, they were actually called W, wife.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
A wife.
Oh, how old-fashioned that was.
Well, they couldn't live together if they weren't married.
That would cause a scandal in a block that was heavily Catholic, right?
That's right.
Multi-ethnic. There were immigrants from 14 countries living on the block, including outliers from like places like Turkey and Finland. You know, who were these people?
But they were all together there in this idyllic ecosystem.
Right.
That was pure Americana.
Right.
There was nobody trying to orchestrate who should live here or getting mad about who's not allowed to live here or complaining about you probably didn't have any messaging about crime or anything. Everybody just kind of lived their life in those days.
Right. I mean, street crime simply wasn't a concern.
Yeah.
I mean, women would walk wherever. You know, the woman who married my uncle was our next door neighbor. And the block is called Myrtle Avenue. I'll refer to it as that. And she was probably the first college graduate in the history of the block, which is why my mother introduced her to her brother, who was the first college graduate in our family. Both my mother and her older brother didn't go to high school, let alone college. And that was more the norm. But now we're getting into the 50s and people are, things are picking up. But, she would tell me she would walk to the train station to catch a train to her college that she went to, commuter college. And then she'd get home in the evening, at night, walk a couple blocks from the train station home. And that, 10 years later, you wouldn't even think of doing that. It would have been unthinkable.
Every house had someone in it.
Right.
At all times.
That's right.
So it was completely secure. There were eyeballs all over the place.
Yeah.
And that's why when you weren't up to no good, but you were a rowdy little kid, you could run around anywhere you wanted to, in and out of people's yards. Nobody was going to shoot you or call the cops. They didn't care because they knew who you were.
That's right. And also, which means that if you did something bad,
yeah,
the neighborhood tom-toms would beat you home.
They would beat you home. And it's like, you better get your ass home before those street lights come on.
Right. And one of my, this is not in my book, but one of my more memorable stories in that regard was I was at church. We all went to Mass. I went to Catholic school. It was about 2 blocks away. And all the kids went to the same Mass, a 9 o'clock Mass. I had a paper route. So I delivered the papers beforehand. But I also had a football game that afternoon. I was 12 at the time. And I woke up with a massive stomach flu. And yet I was not going to be denied playing. I was a quarterback. I wasn't going to be denied playing in this football game. So I delivered the papers, just ill as I possibly could be. And then, so I go to Mass. Now, I'm even sicker now, right? And I'm thinking, okay, Jack, you got to make it through Mass. Because if I had to get up and leave in the middle of the Mass, all the neighborhood tom-toms, they would beat me home. They would tell my mother, right? Jack had to leave. He had to go, right? So I'm holding off, blah, blah, blah. Now, but let's think about this. This is 1960. Berlin, all those crises going on, right? And so we finish the Mass, the Mass is over, blah, blah, blah. And now our special prayer for peace, right? And I couldn't hold it any longer. I just threw up all over the nun in front of me, right? And then I had to leave. Then I got yelled at, and I had to go clean up. And so by the time I get home, everyone in the neighborhood knew that Jack threw up on the nun and sitting in front of him. And I came home and I said to my mom, I'm okay though now. I'm ready to play football now, She said, no, you're not. You cannot play football today. So I was denied that. If I'd just been able to hold out 5 more minutes, I could run to the restaurant, throw it up, got home, played football. Everything would have been cool.
But there you went. You had to throw up on a nun.
And the neighbor, you're right. Everyone had stoops. Everyone sat outside. There was no air conditioning, which is part of the story. In urban neighborhoods.
Oh, yeah, that was a big deal.
Everyone was out front.
And that's another reason why nobody got too far out of anybody's sight.
Yeah.
Where the hell are you going to go? It's too hot.
That's right. Right.
And, I really wonder about, now we talked about your old neighborhood and everything, but you've written 19, how many? 19 books?
This is my 17th, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And they're all wonderful, but they're not like this. I mean, this is a departure for you.
It is.
This is a personal story. And you told me part of the reason you wrote this was because that picture was so cool.
Right. I just found that. And it's, it's a perfect composition. And it was taken by just some random, my mother probably said it to our neighbor, probably Ellen, who became my aunt. Hey, can you take a picture of us? And you look at that picture again.
It's beautiful. And of course, it's not a big deal these days.
No.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
And they all look great. But to get a shot to look this good, to hold it still, to get the lighting right, and it was probably a Brownie Hawkeye camera or something similar to that.
Something simple.
And you would have to do, now, to the younger people, you'd have to hold these box cameras down in front of you at your waist.
Right.
And look in this little viewfinder to see a little mini version of what you were going to eventually get.
And it seeed kind of magical at the time that you could actually take a picture.
It was.
And I'm going to hold mine up just for, if we could see this. It's what you can tell. There's a lot you can tell about this picture, about the lifestyle of a urban dweller, of just a lower middle class ethnic urban dweller circa 1957, which I believe this was the year. What day, I'm going to ask you this, Loy, what day of the year was this?
Sunday.
No, a little more than that.
Oh, Easter?
Easter has to be, right?
Because of the hat.
The hat.
The little girl has a hat on. She's got an Easter bonnet on.
That's my sister, right? You can't, and you didn't dress up like that normally. You might have dressed up for go to Mass, but everyone would dress up like that. And our family would hardly be unique. That would be the norm. It
was about the only day when you'd go, instead of having a veil on, you'd have a bonnet or
That's right.
hat.
You'd have a bonnet, right.
Well, not you.
Right. Sometimes, but that was me and
Bruce. That came much later.
Me and Bruce back in the
That came much later.
Now, my block was also integrated. It had been, from the time we moved there.
But just, it wasn't referred to as integrated.
No, you didn't even think about it.
It was just organic.
It's just the nature of the beast.
That's the way things were.
They were.
Before Whitey got chased out of suburbs.
Right. And what you noticed about, sometimes cultural difference would manifest themselves, as they did on Easter, because blacks on Easter would really dress up.
Oh, yeah.
It was a major, major day for dress up. And so, it was competitive in that world, right? Mm-hmm. So we my family all looked nice there, but on Easter they were really into it, So.
Right.
And then you'd want to display your Easter finery, you know. So
some of the craziest hats I've ever seen.
Oh yeah, yeah. So it was a major day, and it was people actually knew what it was about. It wasn't the spring equinox or any silly thing like that. It was Easter, the day Jesus rose from the dead. So we had something to celebrate.
I'm going to have a little fun with you here.
Okay, sure.
All right, now all of your chapters have funny little titles.
Right.
You obviously put some work into that.
Yes.
I'm going to read a couple of these.
Okay, sure.
And they're naturally going to pique people's interest, like, what in the hell is that about?
Right.
And I'm going to let you maybe, okay. I'm going to read Snowfalls on Pigs.
Yes.
What the hell is that?
Well, I thought that would be intriguing.
That's how you start off.
I start
That's
off.
Chapter 1, Snowfalls on Pigs.
Pigs was shorthand for the alley that ran behind our house. And we were a particularly blessed group of kids because we had an alley that ran the whole length of the block in between our street and the street behind us. And it was our domain. No adults came there except for the occasional rummy.
We had those too.
Yeah. And it was called Pigtails Alley. No one knew why it was called Pigtails Alley. The name probably dates back at least 100 years. And I figured it out why they called it that. And I talk about that in the book, but you're kind of esoteric. So we called it Pigs. And the most memorable nights of my youth in Pigtails Alley would be the nights of a big snowstorm. Because without prompting, everyone would go into the alley to go sleigh riding because it's on a hill, which is even better, right? And those are magical evenings. Mm-hmm. And so what I did is I just looked in the old news accounts to find the night when, the night in 1959 when we had 20 inches of snow and it was March 19th. And when the snow fell late in the year, it was even more welcome. This is late March and you have a big snowstorm. But I also have to, I will say that I ripped off little James Joyce here. It's one of my favorite James Joyce stories is the Dead from his book of essays called The Dubliners. And it concludes with this beautiful, elegiac sort of rhapsody. And it was, the snow was general all over Ireland. That's how it starts. And mine just says the snow was general all over the Northeast. And you didn't see the movie The Dead, did you?
The movie what?
The movie, they made a movie called The Dead about this story.
No.
But it's a beautiful ending. I mean, it's just totally moving. And, especially if you're an old Mick, and it sort of, it's like, other than The Quiet Man, it's the movie I find that I have to watch once a year, just to
bring a little tear to your eyes.
A little tear to my eye, to renew my roots. So...
okay, that's an alley. Okay, I wouldn't have guessed that.
No, it's not.
Janitress.
Janitress. I so love that title. This comes to the list of occupations. Mm-hmm. I was just telling you about earlier.
Yeah. Everybody had one for one thing.
That's right.
That's cool.
And one of the 30 women who had a job outside the house listed her job as janitress, right? What a lovely touch that is.
It is.
Not only does she claim pride in her work, but she claims pride in her sex.
Yes.
Janitress. It's like, you see, now you can't say you can't be a waitress. You have to be a wait staff. You can't be you can't even be an actress.
Right.
They call themselves actors, right?
Yeah.
For some reason, women have stripped themselves of their own particular grace, the grace that was given to them. The whole distinction, the beauty of being a female, they're shucking off. In fact, they're letting men take it in, a lot of cases. But to be a janitress, you're blue collar, you're proud, you're going to own your label. That's why I like that. So,
well, I agree. The fall of Rome. Now, what does that have to do with Newark?
That's a specific
Newark.
Rhymes with pork. Philip Roth is Newark's most famous author.
Okay.
And he wrote about Newark a lot. Philip Roth, this guy, he's probably the 20th century, late 20th century's most prominent American novelist. And he wrote, Portnoy's Complaint and Goodbye Columbus and a lot of other stuff. But he had one story, and he's from Newark, And in this particular story, his and it's a what do you call it, a roman à clef. It's a vaguely disguised real life story. His character, Zuckerman, is living the high life in New York, big star author. He's living in Manhattan now, on Fifth Avenue, whatever, Park Avenue. And he's haunted by this guy from Newark who's a kind of a deranged fan. And he keeps coming, his name is Alvin Pepler, and he keeps coming up to him when he's out walking on the street. You know, you're a big shot now. You don't care what happened in Newark. And it's the fall of Rome, the barbarian invasion. You know, he's talking about what's happened and by the 1970s in Newark. And there's a part in there where I can't even use the words that he says that Roth used because I'd get thrown off whatever air we're on.
Whatever air we're on.
Although I used them in the book because I thought you can't bowdlerize a famous novelist's words by putting asterisks, you know, in where they belong. But that's what that's about. That's his phrase, the fall of Rome.
That's great classism there.
Yeah.
There's one guy who's made something of himself
right.
from this neighborhood that's going to hell.
Right.
It's on him.
Right.
It's, damn it.
Right. You're being scolded for leaving.
That's right.
And that's part of the theme of the book. Everyone left who could. You know, I tell the story, for instance.
That's the crabs in the barrel thing.
Right. Yeah, right. Just trying to scramble your way out of there.
Some crab trying to scramble and all the other crabs pull you back in.
That's it. I tell the story, for instance, of Whitney Houston and her mother, you know, is from Newark, as Whitney was born in Newark also. But they, so Cindy Houston, the mom, Sissy Houston rather, wants to leave Newark because her neighborhood what's happening to her neighborhood is what's happening to my neighborhood. And so the riots come in 1967. She says, we got to get out of here, John, to her husband, who grew up in my neighborhood, in fact. And then finally, a few years later, they do. They leave for the suburbs. But no one scolds them for doing that. No one holds them to blame with the downfall of the city. And you can multiply the Sissy Houstons by 1,000. Blacks were doing the same thing. Puerto Ricans were doing the same thing. Portuguese were doing the same thing. But only white ethnics were being scolded. And that's partly to lift that stigma is why I wrote the book. Now, if I could find my water, I can finish that sentence.
Well, yeah, that is true. That's the very what those people who are foisting that blame onto those successful people or those white people are doing is they're an example of the very thing that they complain about, which is that white people are given so much control and authority and respect they don't deserve and this and that. And yet here they are blaming only the white people.
Right. Yeah.
Or the successful people or whichever the case is.
Yeah.
It's a classist thing.
It's both classist and racist in a way.
Yeah.
You know?
Sometimes it's racist.
Speaking of classism, there is one story I tell in here about an op-ed written in 2017 by a Princeton professor named Leah Bustan. And she writes, she's an authority on white flight, right, from her perch at Princeton University, which is, speaking of idyllic, that is the most idyllic community in America. My great-great-grandparents lived there. My great-grandparents lived there. My grandfather was born there. Why they left is beyond me to move to Newark, but there was probably a reason at the time. But so she concludes this op-ed by saying, and I'm going to paraphrase here, but I'm close to the quote. She goes, you know, what's interesting is that the people who left these cities didn't know why they were leaving. And then she says, I'm not sure they could articulate the reason why. And I laughed out loud when I read that because I'd already interviewed 50 of these people. They knew exactly why they had left, right? And as I write in the book, if classism were as taboo at Princeton as racism, Leah would have been busted down to janitress, you know. But it's not. You could get away with that. She doesn't even recognize it.
No. She's saying, the only way we all can interpret what happened is to say that they obviously didn't even know what they were doing.
And for her, it was either she used the parallel of Trump voters, because she wrote this right after the election in 2016, early 2017, and the shock of it was still reverberating. And so she used a metaphor that her readers with New York Times would understand. Was it pure racism or just racism and economics, right? So she raised that question about Trump voters and then projected it onto the people who left these crumbling cities all over
What do you think? Because the royal we want to know.
The royal we wants to know. Well, she made the mistake of thinking that all New York Times readers think the way she does.
Yeah.
I did too. And I was reluctant to look at the comments. But the comments were blistering. People were saying, how can you possibly write about this subject without mentioning schools or crime, right? At least 20 people provided detailed explanations from all over the place, Philadelphia, Detroit, St. Louis, of why they left. Hair set on fire, widowed mother mugged, neighbor shot, one after another, house burned down. I mean, and it was probably the biggest scolding an op-ed writer ever got in the history of the New York Times. It shocked me because I was as capable of stereotyping people as she was. I thought New York Times readers would all say, you weren't cold enough, you weren't harsh enough on these evil white people, but who knows? So,
all right, one more.
Sure.
And you can tell me to move on to another one if you don't like it.
Sure.
After the fall.
After the fall refers to what happened to Newark after the 1967 riots. See, we were the first big city in North or Northeast to have a major riot with more than 20 people killed.
Really?
Yeah. That was 1967. And what they were doing.
67, I think.
Well, Watts was 65.
Were 64 and 68, I think.
68 was Kansas City. That was Martin Luther King, and that was pretty universal.
We had one in 64, 65. I don't think it was as big.
No, and I'm talking at least 20 deaths.
Okay.
And there was one in Watts in 65, but that was an anomaly. I don't know what that happened. That was in L.A. But in our case, it was we had about 26 killed. And it was, in a city our size, it was major. And what I found out...
I'm sure, by the way, somebody who watches this is going to be able to tell us in the comments better than me. I was too young when that stuff came down here, but go ahead.
Yeah, I could tell you here, and it was in 1968 in Kansas City.
Okay.
I wrote about I made a documentary about Kansas City at that time. And what's the curiosity about Kansas City, and it's worth a sidebar here, is that it was the only year in the last many, many years, probably in the 100 years history of Kansas City, that there was no either major league or high minor league baseball being played in Kansas City.
There you go.
The Athletics left in 67, and the Royals started in 69. And this happened, the riot broke out on what would have been, which was elsewhere, opening day, right?
Really?
Yeah.
It probably happened right down there by Arthur Bryant's where the stadium was.
That's right. And it was a late blooming riot because it was like 4 days after Martin Luther King was killed. He died on April 4th, I believe. And this was on April 8th that the riots started.
Well, we should rename them the Finley riots.
Yeah, right.
Blame him.
Blame him. White flight, right?
Charles Finley.
He took his whole team, right? So what's this? Well, it's probably a scam, likely. Does he have a nice phone? I figured since my phone...
Hello, I'd like to speak with your cashier.
My ringtone is so nice, I don't even bother turning my phone on. No, that was like a major case of white flight. And the riots started right here in Kansas City. And they were pretty significant. People were killed, houses were burned down. In Newark, we had Martin Luther King Day riots also, but we had burned everything down in 67, so there was nothing left to burn down. In fact, I have friends who are firemen, and they said, I asked them if the job got harder or easier over the years. Well, they said in the 60s and 70s it was a bitch, but after that, there's nothing left to burn. So the job got progressively easier, But
wow, that's weird.
There are ironic virtues to burning your city down, I suppose. But what I learned, Loy, is that, and I got this from first-person witnesses that I never talked to before, And the riots came to the edge of our neighborhood, and the rioters were bussed in. They had big charter buses. They drop them off.
Yeah, that still happens, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So how, you wonder.
An Astro riot.
Yeah, again, it's like, what's the angle?
Yeah.
And you wonder, how far back has this been going? I mean, you got things like this submarine thing happening, and then the next thing you know, they're turning over all these pages on the Titanic, and this guy owned this in the Titanic, and they were mad at this guy, and they wanted to take this guy out, and so this whole thing was BS,
Yeah.
and it was a setup, and the Titanic was a false flag. I mean, it seems like I just want to leave, Jack.
You would like to think that something happened spontaneously.
Yeah, organically, real.
And when something does happen spontaneously on our side, and which it often does, like the whole Tea Party movement was spontaneous.
Oh, absolutely.
They couldn't believe that it was spontaneous.
They couldn't believe it. And that's the zero-sum, zero-base. That's the whole deal. That's the difference. The mind is completely wired differently.
Right.
They just can't even believe that could happen. And I was in L.A. when the Tea Party movement was popular.
Right.
And it folded into that group that I used to talk about of the conservatives, the 3,500.
Right. Friends of certain guy, president.
Yeah. And I forget exactly where I was going with that.
How the Tea Party movement folded into that group.
Yeah. And it would pop up, and there'd be like the Beverly Hills Tea Party.
Wow.
And there'd be Pat Boone there,
Yeah.
and he'd be talking, and then somebody else would, Robert Davi would get up, and
Yeah.
he'd be rallying them, and Star Anderson, and all these people were, and this was going on all over L.A.
Right.
And these things were only planned like 2 weeks in advance.
Yeah. Well, what happened in Kansas City is I knew the organizer. I knew her father was, an old political guy. She was a 19-year-old at Park College.
Really?
And it was I believe it was April 15th, tax day, 2009, that this started. And she got a permit to have a little rally at Liberty Memorial in front of the World War I monument there. And and I talked to her before, and I said, what kind of crowd are you expecting? She said, about 150 people. Well, 4,000 people showed up, right? And yeah, and no one expected it, right?
That's true organic.
Yeah, yeah. And so the media reaction to that was, what is that? You saw it, confusion. And so they had to say it was grass, it was AstroTurf, because that's all they do.
Right.
They bus in their people,
Right. They're looking for the buses.
Exactly.
I don't get it.
Where do these people, are these real people? Where do they come from? Yeah, they bus in their people to vote. I mean, we know that. So when something happens spontaneously, they don't know how to do it. But in Newark, the riot was not, the spark was spontaneous, but in the subsequent days was all plotted out. I mean, there were people behind it. I know who they were, and I talk about that because there was a part riot, part rebellion.
How much are you going to sell this for, Jack?
I'm going to sell it. I think the list price is like $28, but for friends, I'll sell it for $27.
You better get on that, folks. Can they get this from you or your website?
No, they go to Amazon. I'd recommend Amazon because that's the way publishers keep score.
Uh-huh.
There's also an audio version if you prefer that, and I did the audio. I insisted on doing the audio.
I know.
Because I didn't want to farm it out. And
it's authentic that way.
Yeah, it is. And it's a lot of work, and it's not inexpensive, but I didn't want to, there's the cheap way out is just hire, you cede the rights to someone, they pay you a couple grand, and
they hire some idiot like
right.
me.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Who says Newark.
Newark, right.
Well, okay, so people can buy that. Now, what about buying the audio version?
You say we just go to Amazon and they'll have audio, or if you want your ebooks, or however you buy books. Do you do ebooks or do you do books when you read, or do you do audiobooks?
I don't read anymore.
You don't read books anymore.
No.
You do a lot of reading.
I have to.
Yeah.
I read what I have to read, but for any kind of leisure or just general edification, everything is done via the cell phone.
Yeah.
I listen to audio.
Yeah. And a lot of people do that.
Sometimes I'll watch a YouTube video, but
Yeah.
normally I'll get distracted or tired of viewing it, and I just go to audio. So things now play in the background for me.
How do you consume Upstream with Cashel and Edge?
Well, both ways. And I found that it's actually better audio only.
Huh.
I think that we come off better audio only. And now I don't know if that's just because I hate myself and you and the way we look.
You don't have to hate me. You can hate yourself. I get that, But
and the way we look.
yeah.
No, I really do. I don't know why. I just like the audio version, but I take it both ways.
Well,
I'll watch it after.
That's what I've heard about you.
Yeah,
So
that's the word on the street.
I'm not going to go.
Now, I don't usually watch it until after I've forgotten about it.
Well,
I give it several weeks so that
it seems fresh to you.
It seems fresh. Yeah.
Well, I have. I like to. I hate to say this, but I'm narcissist enough to watch it on my big screen TV. With
full booming loud.
Right. And then my first, if you do, it's odd because I'll talk about this with books too, is that when something comes out, your first thought is, did I do something horrible?
Right.
Do I have a foot long nose hair that I didn't notice that unfolded during the course of the show, and then once you get over that, then you could begin to watch, and then you think, I don't look as horrible or as awful or as old as I thought I do, I think you show up well on TV, personally.
Thank you. It's that gauze, and I'd like to thank Carly for putting the Vaseline. And even though I gave her the tip because I got it from Bob Guccione, but it's been working out. Yeah,
it's that Gloria Swanson look, where you just at a certain, you don't get old anymore. You just get fuzzy, right?
Yeah.
Katharine Hepburn never gets old.
It's gauzy.
Yeah, it just becomes looking at it through another lens. Now the audiobook was hard. You do audio. You know what that's like. How hard that is to do.
It's not easy.
Now, especially when you were paid, I suspect it's even harder because you're on the clock.
Well, I didn't like doing those kind of I didn't do much of those.
Yeah.
Mainly, I was a utility infielder. I would do odd, quirky things that other people normally couldn't do.
Right.
Didn't have it in their toolbox.
Right.
We need a stutterer. We need an auctioneer. We need we need a tough guy, whatever. I could do these different characters. So I didn't have to do this a lot. Here's 600 pages of something for you to read. That's never happened. I've never read anything that long in my life.
Well, when I was in advertising, I oversaw a whole lot of audio production, and I almost never used myself. Although I started to do it for, when I was doing long-form stuff, because I would do it as the rough track, my read, and then the people paying for it would get used to that. And then I would hire a voice, and they'd say, why don't you use your own, Because
that's all it takes is one person to say that.
Then you turns your head.
And you go, okay.
Yeah, right. The advantage I had was that I knew how it should sound. I knew how it should read. When you do it with another person, then it gets tricky. And you must have had that experience a lot where...
Yeah, that was part of the real craft, was interacting with other voiceover actors.
Yeah.
Because just because you pronounce words nicely, or you have wonderful pipes or whatever, if you can't interact dynamically with other voice people, it ain't going to work.
And what was your most memorable voice gig? Can you think of that?
Probably was the opening song to The Apprentice, starring Donald J. Trump. And it got killed at the last minute by somebody who now I got two versions of who killed it. Somebody said it was this executive at NBC that hated Sinatra-style stuff, and somebody said it was an advertiser. But Trump and Burnett both signed off, or they together. This guy had written this opening song They had a woman do it. They didn't like it. The guy said, "Hey, you can sing like Sinatra. You want to sing this?" I said, "Sure."
Do you remember it?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Can you give us a couple bars here?
It went, "Hey, jump, Donald Trump. Go here, go there. I'll go anywhere." How did it go? Boop, ba-doo-doo-doo-doo-doo. It was one of those real rock. It had the Sinatra horn section behind me. The actual old guys from Sinatra's orchestra playing in the background.
Sort of the,
I really can't because it's one of those jump deals.
That from the hipster era. Come fly with me.
Yeah.
50s, 60s stuff.
And they loved it.
Yeah.
And so they had a big party,
Yeah.
a big celebration for the fact that they signed a contract for it. And it was Cristal champagne, Cuban cigars, big food spread, and everybody's coming up going, "Oh, man, Trump wants you to come on the Tonight Show and sing this song to introduce him when he's promoting the show." He's listening to it all over in the limo. Of course, remember, this is way before Donald Trump as we know him today.
Sure, right, but it's still got to be a head-turning experience.
2000 or something, way back. And so I was very measured about it because I'd only been out there for a few months, and I'd already had all kinds of crazy stuff happen.
Yeah.
I thought, I'll believe this when I see it. Everybody's coming up going, "Oh, yeah, you're going to love the blah, blah, blah." And then there was silence. And just nobody ever talked about it again. And I thought, well, we're waiting for the show. I mean, we're waiting for the show to have its first airing. And when it got really close, I thought, I have a saying about L.A., which is bad news travels slow.
Right.
Because everybody's too much of a wuss.
Right. They're not going to pick up a phone and call you and say, "Hey, sorry, lawyer."
"Hey, bad news. I'm sorry."
Right, yeah.
And then somebody replaced it with the OJs. Money, 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 money.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
But that would have been me with my multi-million-dollar gig.
Yeah.
Possibly way more than that. Because just the money.
The residuals.
Would have been fantastic. Who knows? Because I think something happened to that Trump guy after that.
Yeah, right. I think he's kind of took off in a way.
I'm not sure, but I may have had a little more singing to do.
Right.
A little bit down the road.
You'd probably be doing Upstream with Rogan and Edge now instead of with Cashel and Edge. But I can tell you one story.
Rogan and Cashel and Edge.
Yeah, right.
What kind of a guy do you think I am?
One rejection story involves that I have, and I think going to close on this one but it involves Brad Barrow, who's the head of Real Media.
That's right. Our guy right here.
Right, and that's where we're operating out of. And this was, you could probably look up the date, but it's at least 20 years ago when Brad was still a youngster. And think of that, it's hay fever. We made a short documentary for the Jesse James Museum, which is nearby here, on the life of Jesse James.
Kearney, Missouri.
Right, he's from Kearney, right. And we made it for the Jesse James Museum and Boyhood Home in Kearney, Missouri. It's about a half hour from here. And I was very fortunate. I was the producer. Brad was the cameraman at the time. And I put out a call for reenactors. And I didn't even pay these guys. And they showed up with their horses, their paraphernalia.
And they will literally kill other people for you if they think it's going to get a good shot.
That's right.
And they won't charge you.
And they're into it.
Yeah. And the other guys will die willingly. It's like he's going to shoot me with a musket, and then I'm going to die.
That almost happened. We'll get to that in a second. So I have a weekend to shoot this, and they let us use the Jesse James property, which is a big sprawling property. It was in the fall. Gorgeous day. Couldn't have been better. About 10 guys show up with their horses and all their gear. The first two guys who show up are brothers, and they're young enough and they look enough. Like I said, Frank, Jesse, you're the guys. Cast them on the spot. So then we play it all out. And then just speaking of shooting people, most of us shot outdoors, but we went to rob the Liberty Bank, which is still kept as a museum. And so we go to the bank, and it's a tricky shot because there's these teller bars, those old iron teller bars, and you got to pull your long gun and get it right in between the right bars because the camera lens is right behind that. So the guy takes his gun first time and he goes and it misses to the right. It's understandable. It's not like he was being stupid. Then he misses to the left. And then he takes it and he gets it right down the middle, right at the lens, and the gun goes off. And the noise is astounding in his little room. And then he goes, "Who did that?" He says,
Alec Baldwin.
Yeah, exactly. And his friend said, "You did it." I'm not going to say the exact words. I said, "You idiot. Who do you think did it? You're the one with the gun." Well, it had, fortunately, it was a blank, but it went right at the lens. A brilliant shot. You could never recreate it. Didn't break the lens, which was good, but it did virtually rupture the cameraman's eardrums. And Brad was directing, actually. We had another cameraman. And so that was part of the package. We had a brilliant day. Everything worked out splendidly. We go to show it to the guy we have to show it to, and we find out he's the administrator of parks for Clay County, right? And he's the petty tyrant with this half a dozen flunkies around him when we go show it. He's on the phone while we're showing the video. It's about 15 minutes long. It's short. And when finally it ends, he gets off the phone, and we said, "What would you think?" He goes, "You're going to have to reshoot that." I said, "We're going to have to reshoot that?" And he said, "Why?" I said, "Why?" I mean, it was 150% of what they could possibly expected on the budget they gave us. And he said, Frank, the guy you cast is Frank. You had to recast that. He's a little too full in the face. A little too full in the face. I said, "You saw we morphed from our Frank to the picture of the real Frank? They look almost identical." "Yeah, but he was too full in the face." Brad Barrow, who's, by the way, a very mild-mannered guy, a sweet guy. And I'd never seen him like this before. And I don't blame him. He finally, I'm taking the lead on this conversation. He finally jumps up and goes, "This isn't effing Hollywood. we don't get to recast this. These guys are volunteers, And the guy said, "Well, I think and this guy was in so far over his head, and he was posturing for the people who were there. Like he had some authority and some knowledge of this stuff.
He's Barney Fife and everybody.
There it is. That's right. And I said, "Conversation's over. Who's your boss?" And then they told me it's the county administrator. I said, "This conversation's over. You are in a job you don't belong in. You should have nothing to do with this. Go to the boss. The boss approves it." And then the final bizarre moment of this is we present it at the museum, which they have a nice little museum there. I mean, true, Jesse and Frank are serial killers, but they're part of history. And they were, of course, on the southern side of the Civil War, so they're probably canceled by now. And it was his 150th birthday of Jesse James, literal 150th birthday. And this both sad and pathetic at the same time. They brought in these kids from developmentally disabled kids to wish Jesse James a happy birthday, which included blowing out the candles on his cake. And I don't think they knew that not everyone gets to be 150 years old, So they all sang happy birthday like he was in the room and blew out the candles. But it was a perfect ending.
Happy birthday, dear murderer.
Happy birthday to you. And so it ended. And so our show ends here today on Upstream with Cash and Edge. And thanks to Real Media Studios, by the way. And sorry about telling that story, Brad, but you were at your best that day.
That's right. He called Brad out, didn't he? Ladies and gentlemen, wherever you buy books, Untenable by my partner in Upstream, Jack Cashill.
Hey, thanks for letting me push the book this episode away.
It looks wonderful. Now, it really did just come off the press.
Literally.
So I haven't read it.
You're the first person
all
to
it
hold
takes
it,
is
other than me.
To look at a couple of these table of contents chapters to tell me that that's going to be a very easy read.
Yeah, it is.
I chew right through that. That's like one airplane trip right there.
Yeah, I write books to be read. Just one last note on this. My cover designer, Joel Gilbert, good guy, and he volunteered to do this. But when I get the cover back, the original design back, there's only 5 people in the picture. And I said, "What happened to my big brother in the back here?" This is my brother Billy. He was only 16 years old at the time. He was a big football player and whatnot. And he said, oh, he didn't look like he belonged there, so I took him out. I said, are you going to tell his daughters that he's been eliminated? Can I put them on the phone to you and say their father has been eliminated from the family photo?
So your designer buddy is not a family man.
No, that's fair to say, right? He does not understand family dynamics.
I'm going to assume he's single.
He is single, right? He's an L.A. guy, he's an L.A. filmmaker, so.
Well, I think I would have known there'd be strings attached to that decision.
There are living relatives who'd have to be dealt with.
So I'm not quite as L.A. single as he is.
No. He's light years beyond you. But you're not in L.A. You've come back to the heartland and gotten some soul back. So
I have, and now it's just like back to good old Americana.
There we are. And we'll be back next week with some more Americana here on Upstream with Cash on Edge.
Bye-bye.